For a sovereign nation to unlock large-scale climate capital allocations, specifically from the Green Climate Fund, it has to prove an environmental return on investment. But international climate finance requires strict adherence to UNFCCC mandates, specifically Decision 17 CP21. That directive dictates that simply counting tons of reduced carbon is legally insufficient to access funding. This diagram illustrates the dual mandate at the core of the system. Nations must also implement the Cancun Safeguards, 7 mandatory principles engineered to guarantee that carbon reduction interventions do not inadvertently damage local biodiversity or disenfranchise the populations living inside the forests. Cambodia's attempt to prove this compliance is documented in its second summary of information, capturing the critical 2018 to 2022 dataset. This document tracks the country's mathematical and legal transition from REDD+ readiness into active implementation.
To pass an international audit, the data must satisfy 2 distinct legal thresholds. First, a safeguard must be addressed, meaning the protection is formally written into the nation's sovereign laws. Second, it must be respected, meaning the government can produce field data proving the law was successfully executed on the ground. Securing millions in sovereign climate finance requires an evidentiary apparatus that accurately links abstract international human rights mandates to hyper-local forestry data. In 2016, Cambodia expanded its protected area system to cover 40% of its national territory. This expansion transferred massive land stewardship and management responsibilities directly to the Ministry of Environment. Looking at this institutional flowchart, we see the bureaucracy built to manage the territory. The REDD+ Task Force Secretariat acts as the central body. Inside, the MRV unit handles carbon measurement, while the SIS unit tracks safeguard data. Those national policies filter downward through provincial and district administrations before reaching independent implementing partners. To counter top-down rigidity, an active consultation group inserts civil society, gender advocates, and indigenous representation into the strategic loop. A precise chain of command is required to legally attribute a localized carbon reduction to the national government's overall mitigation targets. If the reporting lines break, the carbon cannot be claimed. The first legal hurdle is structural. The government must prove its domestic laws map cleanly onto the abstract requirements of the Cancun Safeguards, specifically regarding land tenure and indigenous rights. This matrix maps the baseline. On the left, UNFCCC Safeguard C demand protection of indigenous rights. On the right, we map Cambodian statutes. The foundational 2001 Land Law, Article 26, legally recognizes collective property rights, allowing communities to secure communal land titles. This is reinforced by the National Policy on the Development of Indigenous Peoples, which formally recognizes local community committees as legitimate, state-sanctioned dispute resolution mechanisms. In 2023, the government enacted the Environment and Natural Resources Code. This updated framework consolidates decades of fragmented regulations into a single, cohesive governance structure. The new code directly addresses Safeguard B by legally enforcing strict public participation requirements and transparency mandates during all environmental impact assessments. Passing legislation checks the UNFCCC's addressed requirement, but carbon markets place zero financial value on a law until there is documented evidence of its enforcement on the ground. The respected requirement pulls focus out of the capital and into remote forested provinces. Here, theoretical laws must translate into measurable policies and measures. The communities living in these areas face severe physical pressures. Unregulated agricultural encroachment and illegal logging operations actively strip the landscape, driving both rapid deforestation and the immediate disenfranchisement of local populations. The state's primary intervention is community-based forest management. By establishing community forests and protected areas, the government legally delegates management rights to the populations living inside the boundaries. This map isolates the testing grounds for these interventions. High-profile REDD+ pilot projects in Keo Saima, Prelang, and the southern Cardamom landscape operate as the primary laboratories for executing these safeguards. A critical metric of success is the indigenous communal land titling process. By late 2022, 39 indigenous communities successfully secured formal communal titles, creating a legal shield against outside encroachment. The Keo Saima project provides the clearest data loop. The project successfully sold carbon credits on the voluntary carbon market and deliberately routed that revenue back into the community to fund indigenous tenure security processes and local infrastructure. By linking community-led management to carbon finance, the government establishes a model where secure land tenure and verified emission reductions function as mutually reinforcing goals. The data reveals a structural friction point. While projects like Kiosima and Prelang successfully proved the methodology, they operate as isolated accounting silos on the voluntary carbon market. Notice how this national baseline grid completely absorbs the individual nodes. This is the concept of a nested REDD+ architecture, and it is the ultimate structural requirement for a sovereign climate program. Nesting mandates the application of common carbon baselines, uniform reference levels, and highly standardized safeguard tracking protocols across every single carbon project. This mathematical alignment is required to prevent double counting. If a private developer and the national government both claim the exact same metric ton of reduced emission, the integrity of the entire ledger collapses. By forcing private project developers into the nested framework, the state guarantees that independent operators are held to the exact same rigorous social and environmental safeguard standards as government agencies. A fully nested system signals to international auditors that a country has upgraded its operations from a collection of fragmented conservation projects into a high-integrity, national-scale carbon accounting mechanism. The final destination for all the legal documentation and the localized field data is a centralized database known as the Safeguard Information System. Scheduled to be fully operational by 2025, the SIS functions as the transparent, public-facing ledger for every climate intervention executed within the country's borders. The reporting process also catalogs systemic hurdles. The official 2018 to 2022 data directly acknowledges that the COVID-19 pandemic severely restricted field-based forest monitoring, degraded patrol operations, and drastically slowed the land titling process. The documentation also flags ongoing institutional friction. Administrative bottlenecks regarding interministerial coordination and limited enforcement capacity remain active risks to scaling the architecture. Openly submitting these operational failures and frictions to the UNFCCC is a required feature of a high-integrity system. A flawless dataset is usually a manipulated dataset. By transparently auditing its successes alongside its systemic challenges, a sovereign nation proves the maturity of its environmental governance. That mathematical and legal transparency is the only mechanism that clears the pathway to Green Climate Fund allocations.